Okay, everybody. It is the 1st of January 2021. It's your host, John Thomas Hill. And this is simply put a personal blog that I'm going to be doing hopefully every day for the remainder of the year. I have made the New Year's resolutions to A, do a podcast today, B, to write something, either to work on my novel or work on a short story, or just make a blog post every day. And 3, to watch something on one of the streaming services or one of my DVDs every day. So, this is the first of first. It's 10:17 a.m. East Coast time. I got up not too long ago, and so we do this. Yesterday on the last podcast of the year, I would talk about today about the lessons of 2020. And I think the most important lesson is that freedom isn't free. Freedom isn't free of responsibilities to not just yourself, not just your family, not just your community, but the nation. And a lot of people have forgotten that. There's a reason why this pandemic has been handled far worse here than, say, in New Zealand, in Australia, in other parts of the world. And that is because we, for some reason, seem to think that freedom only matters. That we don't understand the responsibilities of being in a free society. We don't understand that being in a free society doesn't necessarily mean that you're 100% completely, totally free to do whatever the hell you want. It means that as long as your freedom doesn't infringe upon the freedoms of others, you can do pretty much whatever you want within reason. That's the reason why you can't just build a nuclear reactor on your property. Okay? There's a reason for that. We forget about that. We forget about that sometimes. We think that nothing should ever infringe upon our freedoms. Nothing at all. When in fact, we forget that freedom is for everybody, not just ourselves. And I think that's the important thing we need to learn from 2020 is that it ain't just about us. That's when people who complain about having to be forced to wear a mask don't understand that it's not that we want to force you to wear a mask, it's that we have to force you to wear a mask. Because the pandemic is just that bad. And the reason we have such resistance to it is pretty obvious. For over 4 decades now, there has been a movement by those in the right wing to completely discredit anything the government does because there is this fantasy that if government doesn't exist, everything will be better. Well, what happens when there is no government? Anarchy. But it's not that they want anarchy. It's that they don't want democratic government. Small d. The people that really are pulling the strings behind all of this, the money behind the Republican Party, they don't want you to have a say anymore in your government. Because to them, you're just a cog in the wheel. And they want you to think you do. They want you to go along with the idea that you have a voice. But in reality, money talks. And they want to make the system to where, yeah, you can go vote all you want to. But they've got it to where they know exactly how the districts are going to be played out, and that they know exactly how the vote's going to go for them. Now, it's not completely gone perfectly because, obviously, as we all know, the Democrats won the presidency. They kept control of the House. But they didn't win the Senate, which is kind of weird because you got people who are going that the Democrats somehow committed mass fraud. If they did that, why didn't they win the House by a bigger margin? Why didn't they win the Senate by a bigger margin? I mean, they hadn't won the Senate yet. There's still the chance that they could get 50-50 control of the Senate if the two runoffs next week go the way of the Democrats, which the last time I checked the polls, they were. But to get it back onto a broad point, it's not so much political. It's the fact that for 40 years, we've been told that it's not about we, it's about me. And you see, that's the problem. Because in a society, it can't just be about me. It has to be about we. Because if it's just about me, then anything that I do is fine. You know, if I think that that's a nice PS5 you have there, I want one, but I'm not going to go buy one in the store. I'm going to take yours, and if you do anything to stop me, I'll hurt you, if perhaps even kill you. Now, if you think about that for a second, going, "Oh, John, you wouldn't do anything like that." No, because A, I don't do much gaming, and B, I was raised not to steal stuff. Okay? But you can kind of get the idea of where some of the problems we have in society come from. The biggest problem we have is that we have this idea of, you've probably heard this, keeping up with the Joneses. Now, it's nice to want things. I don't have a problem with that. I want a lot of things. It's realizing that that it's not vital, that some of the things you want are not vital to your existence. I want food because food is something I just don't want. I need because I have to live. But I don't need a Lamborghini. Okay? Now, I may hit Powerball and Mega Millions and be able to afford one, but if I'm smart, I'll save that money and buy a nice car that gets good gas mileage, that runs well, is dependable, and I'm not paying through the nose with free insurance. You see, but the problem is we've glorified wealth in this country. We've deified it. And that's a big problem, because when you deify wealth, and we have, look at the show back in the day, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and tell me that we didn't deify wealth. We did. It's as obvious as the nose on your face. We did. And it's a shame, because we should have seen the problem for what it was. And now we are faced with a very serious issue in this country, where you have people who have far more than they'll ever possibly need, who could easily invest that money or allow their money to be taxed to where that money can go back and do better things. Instead, they have it stashed away somewhere. Now, you're saying to yourself, well, it's my money, I earned it, why can't I do what I want with it? That's true. But you see, the problem is, you're thinking of me, not of we. The success of America up until the 1980s was that we thought of not just me, but of we as well. We were able to balance things out. Unfortunately, we got away from that. And now it's all about me. It's all about the individual. There was another point in history where we had this happen. It was the 1920s. Now, if you know your history, you know what happened at the end of the 1920s, the great stock market crash, which led to the Great Depression, which led to the need to basically have huge government to basically help rebuild the economy. The problem is that the power brokers, the ones that remembered what happened in the 20s, wanted to make sure that mistake didn't happen again. So they were more cautious this time. But the problem was they almost made that mistake happen again in 2008 with a financial collapse. We almost had another Great Depression. And it was because of the actions of certain global governments, the United States, Australia, and a few others, that kept it from being worse than it actually was. We bailed out industries, the auto industry and a few others, and we were able to keep the economy going to the point where it could recover and not completely collapse like it did in 1929. Sorry, I got something in my mouth, a little hair. Sorry. It's bugging me. Anyhow, we're faced with another situation. The global economy is not doing well in the pandemic. You've got businesses either shutting down or being forced to shut down. And the only reason that in many places that businesses have kept going is because the government has basically funded them to stay shut. Well, that hasn't happened here necessarily in the United States. To a degree, it did. Small businesses were able to get certain loans, but now here's the problem with what's going on in Congress right now. Yeah, there are legitimate concerns that giving people $2,000 is going to put even more debt on us, and that's understandable. The problem is that A, we're already in debt, and B, do we think what happens if the economy collapses short term and we don't have the revenue coming in? So it's a problem that, do you sacrifice the long term for the short term, knowing that you can fix the long term down the road? Of course, we've had this before where people have thought, well, we'll just spend now and pay later. But the problem is, if we don't spend now, we might not be able to pay later because our economy may completely collapse to the point where even the large corporations are falling apart because people aren't spending money. This is the problem with having low taxes on corporations and the rich. They're not investing that money back into businesses here. They're either doing it overseas, they're over where the labor is insanely cheap, and in many cases it's still not going into the economy anyway. So what I'd like to see in this new year is that Joe Biden reverse this to a degree. I'm not saying he should go all FDR, but I think that we need to focus on getting more of that revenue in from people that are just simply having their money sit in a bank account somewhere. The problem is, people say, well, it's their money. Yeah, but there's hypothetical freedom and then there's realistic freedom. Realistic freedom is that you have a society strong enough that your business can flourish with a consumer base that can afford your product and an employee base that can also afford your product. My mom, God rest her soul, was not an economist. She never went to college or anything, but she had a great economic theory. You can't spend money you don't have. And, well, that makes a lot of sense personal finance-wise. It makes a lot of sense in a macroeconomic sense. Because if if the general populace, the people who earn wages, aren't making enough to make ends meet, they're not going to want to spend on, I don't want to call them luxury items, but basically non-necessities like a smartphone, a tablet, a smart TV, another car. You see what I'm getting at? This isn't about forced wealth distribution, it's encouraged wealth distribution. It's what happened in the 1950s. During the era of Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, by the way, do you know what the tax rate was for the rich? 91%. Do you want to know why it was like that? It wasn't 91% of every. It was, you didn't just lose 91% of your wealth. Basically, what it meant was it was to encourage the wealthy and the corporations to invest in businesses by hiring more people, increasing wages, improving their buildings, and improving their equipment they use. It was to encourage investment in their businesses, so that money would go into the economy, so that the money they earned would be put back into the economy, so they could earn more money, so they could put more money in the economy. And for the most part, it worked. You know, there's always economic issues. We have recessions from time to time. The problem is that somewhere along the way in the late 70s, and we had some very difficult economic issues in the 70s, a lot of it was the fact that we didn't realize that the economy was more interdependent globally than we think it was. Here's the problem with people who talk about globalism being a bad thing. It's a reality. Okay? You may not like it. It may not be perfect. But we can't just simply say, don't buy anything Chinese because blah, 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 blah. We have allowed ourselves, and it's not necessarily we, it's the fact that the powers that be allowed this. A lot of people like to talk about, well, Bill Clinton's the one that signed the free trade deal, NAFTA, and they like to blame him for it, and he deserved the blame. But do you realize that it was actually the Republicans, for the most part, that pushed the deal? Not to say they weren't Democrats who pushed it, there were plenty of those too. But there were Republicans who didn't support it. One in particular, or Jesse Helms. Now, I despise Jesse Helms' legacy for a lot of reasons. There's one I will give him credit for. Standing up for American industry. You call it protectionism, I call it seeing the reality of an American marketplace which has spent billions and billions of dollars educating, at the time, what was the most educated, most capable workforce in human history, and undercutting it to send those jobs overseas to a populace that was not nearly as well educated, and hoping that people would deal with cheaper products that weren't quite as good as the stuff being made here. And guess what? I hate to break it to you. We were happy with buying cheaper stuff that didn't last as long. It put together a culture of obsolescence. Hey, that toaster only lasts 5 years. Oh, well, we'll go buy another toaster that's really cheap. Instead of having an American-made toaster that could last you 20, 25, 30, 40, who knows how long. The problem is we have instilled in our culture keeping up with the Joneses. Why do you think that every few years we get a new PlayStation. What was wrong with PlayStation 2 or 3? Because they weren't quite as good. We built up consumer demand. We built up this marketing, commercialized beast that basically has people going broke so that they can brag to their friends, hey, I got a PS5 or I got a whatever the new Xbox is. I don't keep track of it anymore. I still have a PS2. I don't play games at all that often, maybe once or twice a year. I mainly play sports games, and I used to play a lot years ago, but even then I used to play. The only reason I got a PlayStation 2 was that it was cheap, and I bought it for real cheap. I think I laid it away at Walmart. This is like 2004, 2005, and I got it real dirt cheap. So it was my little. But by that time, you had PlayStation 3 on the horizon. And I basically bought a bunch of cheap games because I didn't need the new ones. You've got people out here right now who are sacrificing, saving money to have the best new game they can get their hands on. Now that's perfectly fine. And here's the problem. This is what I'm going to get around to. The problem is, you don't really need the video games. It's nice to have, but we've taken wants and turned them into needs. And sadly, it's hard to reverse that trend. Look at society now. We're so reliant on the internet and technology that internet usage has become a necessity. Mobile phones have become a necessity, but they're not regulated like necessities. So that means the industry can charge whatever they want to. And the problem is other countries have realized this and regulated them properly. So that's why you see countries that you never thought would have faster internet than we do actually have faster internet. And we're stuck in rural areas that have nothing, barely better than dial-up or DSL. So yeah, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm going off tangents big time. But let me get back to this point. If there's a lesson to learn about 2020 is that selfishness and thinking about yourself first does not do a democracy good. Yes, you've got individual rights, but you also have individual responsibilities. Not just to yourself, not just to your family, not just to your job, but also to society as a whole. We need to get back to that. For the last 40 some odd years, we have forgotten what it means to be an American for America. We see American as for us, an individual, or just our immediate family, or just for those people closest to us. A few years back, I had a discussion with someone who made the point that he believes that the fact that we got rid of the draft has been detrimental to the American spirit. Now, the reason we got rid of the draft was because it was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of protests, and it was causing a lot of friction, and Richard Nixon, being the political savvy animal that he was, knew that this was a smart political move to kind of quell the radicals, get rid of the draft. It wasn't that popular even amongst his base. But this person, who was surprisingly a liberal person, said that we got away from the sense of service to the country and to other people. We got rid of the draft. Now, there are countries where you can be drafted but not serve in the military as in fighting, but you serve the community, the whole, And I think maybe we should do something like that for our youth. where you have to commit to 2 years of serving. But of course, you'd have people that are rich that would find ways to buy out of that and all that, and there'd be exemptions and all that. But it's one of those things that made me think we've gotten away from the sense of people love to say they're patriotic for Americans, but when you press them about it, it's not because they're proud to be American for other Americans. They're proud to be America because they can do whatever they want to, and to heck with everybody else. That's why when it comes to things where we shouldn't be doing because they're bad and harmful for the economy, for the climate, for whatever, we tend to do them because we have this sense that we can do them because for some reason the Founding Fathers believed you can do whatever you want to. Well, the Founding Fathers were not perfect. They were slave owners for the most part. They didn't entirely want a full free democracy. In fact, probably, if you're listening to this, unless you're rich and wealthy and have a lot of land, they didn't want you to vote. So, yeah, when you look at your history, it's not as clear. Here's the thing. We need to get back to thinking not just ourselves, but our country and society as a whole. And I'm going to end this up really quickly because my throat's getting dry and I need something to drink. We have to embrace the fact that it's not just individuality that makes America great. It's the fact that we can come together for common cause at times and help build a better country. Not just when we're being allegedly attacked, but when we see needs to make the country better, we come together and make it better. The problem is, for the last 40 years, there's been an anti-government movement because it's not even theoretical. Here's the deal. A lot of the reason for that back then was because government was bloated. Bureaucracy didn't have the oversight for bureaucracy. The problem is we still have those same problems. It's just the government isn't really that smaller. It's just a lot of it's been moved over to the Defense Department and places where it's beneficial to those who allegedly want small government. They just want small government for you, not for them. We need to change that. We need a government that's effective, efficient, and accountable to the people. And in the near future, I'm going to go into detail when I have a chance to really think through and not just come on here and talk off the top of my head, which I like to do a lot of times, but to kind of give you an idea of what my thoughts are. Well, I have fulfilled my first day of the next 365 of doing podcast. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to go relax a little bit. Probably write something here in a little bit, probably a blog post. And then watch something, which is my commitment to myself to try and make myself feel better and get out of this funk I've been in for quite a long time. So, hope you have a happy new year. Hope we can get rid of this pandemic soon enough so we can all get back to some sort of normality. It won't be completely normal, but it will be more closer to normal than we have before. Take care. Have a great day. Good night. Good luck. And may the good news be yours.